All right, thank you, Masood. And I just want to welcome everyone to Salt Lake City. So are there any first-time visitors to Utah or Salt Lake City in the room today? So we've got a few. Well, welcome. I'm not sure who Masood knows, but as he mentioned yesterday, it was super hazy. There was a lot of smoke in the air. It was hot. Today it's beautiful, cool. So he did something right. So thank you, Masood, for arranging this weather for us today. Um, I'd also like to extend a special thank you and welcome to the students in the room. Could you just raise your hand really quick? Awesome. And I know throughout the symposium, we're going to have students coming and students going, but I appreciate you being here. You're going to hear about a lot of the challenges that this industry is facing. This industry is going through a pretty serious transformation just from a grid perspective in the types of resources that we're seeing on the system. In the coming years, we're probably going to see a significant build out of transmission. Loads are changing pretty drastically currently. And that's not to mention a lot of the other challenges that we're seeing with things related to extreme weather events or cybersecurity. So I just want to thank, the students in the room. You've picked a fantastic time to take an interest in this university or in this industry, and we are going to need the best and the brightest to help us through some of the challenges that are ahead of us. I also want to thank the team of experts from across the Western US and Canada that are participating in the NSF WIRED Global Center. I admire you and I join in your commitment to the reliability and resiliency of the Western interconnection. This is exciting work, and I really look forward to hearing and seeing more of what we can do together. I want to talk about WECC for just a moment, just to set a little bit of context for some of the comments that I'm going to make. So for those of you who may not be familiar with WECC, or the long name of the organization is the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, we are the regional entity responsible for the reliability and security of the bulk power system in the Western US and Canada and a small portion of Mexico. And so we saw a couple of maps earlier that really outline the footprint of WECC's purview. We're headquartered here in Salt Lake City, just coincidentally. I've been asked that question a lot, like, why are you in Salt Lake? When WECC was formed, we could have picked a lot of different cities in the West. We could have, been in California, one of the major cities. Why Salt Lake City? So it actually stems from an early partnership that we had with the University of Utah. So WECC was actually formed in 1967, shortly after the Northeast blackout of 1965. In the years leading up to that blackout, new technologies began to dominate people's lives. So people started to rely more and more on electric lights, on different types of appliances. And after the blackout of 1965, I think our government and our industry kind of stood up and said, wow, we have developed a society that's becoming more and more dependent on electricity. And we need to make sure that going forward, we do all that we can to keep the lights on, to maintain, social stability. And so in 1967, some of the utilities in the West got together and said, we're going to create an organization that will allow us to get together to study the system, to plan the system, to develop performance requirements that we'll all abide by, and to develop different types of processes and mechanisms for how we're going to operate this interconnected grid. And that's how WECC was born. So back to the partnership with the University of Utah. So in 1967, we were still performing system studies, and we needed a lot of computing power. So we had this partnership with the University of Utah to access one of their supercomputers. And so that's kind of how our relationship began. When I first started working at WECC, our offices were actually just about a block over in Research Park. So we had really easy access to the university. And there's actually a few people who still work at WECC who remember the days of carrying, I think they were boxes of punch cards over to the university at night so they could run their simulations overnight and come back in the morning and get the results. So kind of a fun fact on a long time partnership and relationship between WECC and the University of Utah. So over the years, WECC has evolved and changed, as you can imagine. When I joined the organization 20 years ago, I think we had about 25 employees. Now it blew up at one point to about 300. We bifurcated the organization. Now we're down to about 170 employees. We serve many different functions, but I want to talk a little bit about the functions that are within the area of the organization that I'm part of. So some of the things that we do are event analysis. So whenever there's a major event on the system, we partner with the affected utilities and others to really understand what happened. We do a root cause analysis. In many cases, we develop lessons learned documents to help prevent reoccurrence of those different types of events. We have a situation awareness function. So we're looking at the grid in near real time. We're looking at different things like weather conditions, wildfire conditions, and we're working closely with reliability coordinators in the interconnection to understand what threats there are to the reliability of the system at any given time. We have a lot of specialized tools that we use to do this. We partner with national organizations, the federal government here in the US, to help keep them informed when we see different types of situations occurring or the potential for situations occurring. And I'll get back to that here in just a second. We do power system risk analysis. So we have a stakeholder process where we get together with our stakeholders here in the West to try and understand what the biggest risks to reliability are, so that we can either initiate activities at WECC or through our WECC structure, or so that we can partner with others who are performing activities to try and mitigate those risks. We develop planning models. And so here in the Western Interconnection, WECC develops interconnection-wide power flow, dynamic stability, production cost model. We're going to be getting into EMT modeling a bit. We do some short circuit modeling. And so we are that organization here in the West that collects the information that we need to develop these models. And then we use these models for our own assessments. And we also share these models with other stakeholders so that they can perform different types of planning assessments. A big piece of that as well is system model validation. So when there are events on the system, we can take real-time information or actual system response information, compare that to what our models are showing to see how well or how accurate those models are. We perform different types of reliability assessments. So these are often forward-looking. We look at different future scenarios, such as extreme weather conditions. You know, what are there stability issues on the system in 10 years if we see really hot summers or really cold winters or something like that. We look at different scenarios, different types of technologies. So different levels of battery penetration. And I could go on and on and on about the different types of assessments that we do, but we do also partner with our stakeholders to perform those assessments and create takeaways and information that is useful to them in their own planning efforts. We do reliability standards development. So I won't get too much into this, but at least here in the US, there is a national effort to develop mandatory reliability standards that registered entities are obligated to follow. And if they don't follow, there are monetary penalties for violating those standards. So we partner with industry to develop these standards that they're going to follow. We help to develop industry guides and system performance metrics and other types of system metrics. So we do that in close coordination with different industry partners. And typically when we develop those types of metrics, they're not maybe at a standards level, but it is generally understood that that's what industry will abide by, or those different types of guides. At WECC, we also have a whole bunch of different types of technical committees. So we bring together stakeholders to talk about different issues. We have, for example, a group that's focused on building power flow and dynamic base case models. So we bring all of the experts together to talk about what models we're going to develop, how we're going to improve the data quality, when we're going to develop certain models, what years, what different types of scenarios we're going to look at. So that's just one example. I think last time I checked, we had around 35 different technical committees at WECC. So that's a little bit about WECC, and it's because of these functions and what I've seen occurring over the last several years, specifically from a weather standpoint, that I'm really, really excited to participate in this conversation over the next couple of days. And with that, I'm gonna shift my focus just a little bit and talk about resilience. You probably heard the word reliability when I was talking about WECC, probably 60, 70, 200 times, because that's really our primary focus is reliability. And I would be willing to bet if I asked you all what the definition of reliability is to you, there would be a pretty common theme, I think, that we would see when it comes to grid reliability. You know, one common phrase that I hear a lot is, you know, when you flip the switch, the lights need to come on. That's electric reliability. So keeping the lights on. But what about resilience? And I'm going to throw this question out to you. So let's make this a little interactive. And I've talked to a lot of people over the years about resilience, and I've gotten a lot of different concepts, a lot of different thoughts. But we're at a resilience symposium. Let's talk about resilience. So I want to hear your thoughts. In your mind, what is the definition of resilience, and how does it relate to reliability? Do we have any takers that are willing to answer that question? Perfect.
This is my definition of, or at least my concept of this. This is wonderful. Hello? Hello? No? This is my concept of resilience. To me, resilience is in response to events.
Okay.
So to be a resilient system is one in which, in response to, say, a large event, the service levels to the customers go down as little as possible for as short as time as possible. So sort of two dimensions of resilience. How many people were affected, to what extent? And so as percentage of total, you want that number to be small. And then you can add some more things to it, like it should be equitably distributed and not just the poor people get hit. And you can add things to the first dimension of total population impacted by the event. And then how long did it take for the service to return to some reasonable approximation to what it was before? And it's possible that to a large event, you will return to a new normal, to a new steady state, if you will, which is different from where you were before, because the event changes the structure of the system. So that's my definition of resilience.
No, that's great. So you hit on a couple of things like event severity. So typically when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about bigger events affecting more people, widespread. You also talked about the ability of the system or the grid to recover post-event. I like that. Okay, please.
Actually, I wanted to mention recovery, which is essentially, because I think on the long term, there is also a word that again is adaptability. So basically on the long-term resilience means that whatever the change will happen in the future, the system will be able to adapt to it.
All right. So we just added another element, adaptability. I like that. I like that. Okay, please.
I think it's all covered already. I think to simply state it, the ability to anticipate, prepare, react, and recover from any type of hazard that the system might face.
All right, so thank you. So you hit on another important piece, which is the preparation concept, and it probably ties really well with adaptability as well. So any other thoughts All right, right down front.
There's a very important aspect of consumer need here that we have, it's going to be happening. It's not always about the great resilience, it's not about the back. Like we need to be, the local has to be very specific use. So also considering community needs, these capacities to adapt or to be resilient themselves and then to
Yeah, very important piece of this, the end use customer community that's impacted. Because typically, you know, during these large scale events where we talk about resilience, people are impacted by more than just loss of electricity. There's something else going on. And to return them to being able to have electricity is critical. It means the difference between life and death in some situations.
You've said everything, but to me, it's individual or industry or area or the minimal disruption, basically your life before and after, how fast you can bring it to normal conditions, right? And we should design systems that are resilient.
Minimal disruption. I like that. Thank you.
I think everyone cover most of the things. The way I see prevention before it happens. So if we can prevent, that's probably the best case we have. And when we are in the disaster, then probably we try to minimize the area under the curve. And the area under the curve would be in the y-axis of function of the impact in terms of the customer, in terms of the load. And so we want to minimize the area under the curve. Once we over the disaster, then yes, as people mentioned, it could be, you know, we settle down something what is previous standard. So we may come up with something completely new solution. That's like this.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Predictability, predicting innovation. I love it. I love it. Any other comments on resilience? Is it still clear what resilience is? We're kind of gelling around some general themes, and we've heard a lot of different perspectives related to resilience. Okay, we'll take one more.
I can't take credit for what I'm saying. This came from my PhD advisor. I deal with a lot of non-technical people, and they asked me to define resilience. For technical people, you guys covered it all. For non-technical people, resilience is like trees. You have a big tree and you have a small trees. Big trees are like reliable. They have to stand the storm which is coming their way, and under a big storm they break down. So reliability breaks down. Resilience is like the small branches. When the wind comes, they bend. When it's gone, they bounce back and come back straight back again. So they withstand it and they recover fast.
Love the analogy. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your perspectives and your thoughts. And I think as an industry, we're going to continue to ruminate over this concept of resilience. And I think likely in the next several years, you'll probably see a lot of different guideline standards, who knows, coming out to address this concept of resilience. So I want to talk a little bit about weather events in the Western interconnection. So a couple of months ago on July 10th, and I was talking to Brian beforehand about this day, the West set an all-time peak demand record of 167,988 megawatts. So just shy of 168 gigawatts of peak demand. And try and remember that number, because I'm going to talk about a few other things that'll help kind of put that you'll need that as kind of context. So this record came in the midst of several cities in the coastal states and Los Angeles setting all-time temperature records as well. And this was during a heat wave. This peak demand record from 2 months ago beat the previous record that was set on September 6th, 2022 during another massive heat wave. And do we have a lot of people from California in here? We got Brian. Okay. So you probably remember these dates really well. September 6th, 2022, during another massive heat wave that whose record beat the previous record. And then that record beat a record that was set on August 18th, 2020, during yet another heat wave that I'm going to talk a bit more about. I'm going to go into detail about that. In the last 4 or 5 years, and this is Branden talking, I don't have a whole lot of data to back this up, but this is my experience. The West has experienced on a fairly regular basis extreme and wide area weather events such as heat domes, heat waves, wildfires, floods, droughts, atmospheric rivers, extreme winter storms, derechos, and I'm not a weather person, but the list goes on and on and on. And these events are occurring more frequently. I talked about the August 2020 event very briefly. When that event happened, I think California said it was like a 1 in 35 year type weather event. And then the next June, we had another heat wave, another heat dome that was setting records all over the place. And then the next September in 2022, same thing. So we're starting to see these events more and more frequently. They're more severe, and they're covering a wider area. So I'm going to talk about specifically the August 2020 heat wave event. And before I get into the event itself, I just want to talk a little bit about dates. And it's kind of funny in this industry how certain dates get burned into your brain. So throughout my experience at WECC, there are dates like June 14th, 2004. There was a West Wing outage that was pretty significant. We had September 8th, 2011, which was the Southwest blackout. And August 2020 is another one of those days that's just burned into my brain. And I remember the day, it was a Saturday. Let's see, I think I wrote it down. Saturday, August 15th, 2020, I was at my son's soccer game on a Saturday. And you remember this is right during the pandemic. So we're at the soccer game. We've all got our masks on. The parents are sitting, 6 feet apart, watching the little kids play soccer. The night before, on August 4th, and it was hot. It was really hot. I left out that really important piece of it. The night before, California had shed load on August 14th, about 1,000 megawatts of load because of resource deficiencies. So in the evening hours after the sun went down, we started to lose a lot of solar generation. There just wasn't enough energy. They weren't able to import enough energy. There just wasn't enough energy available. So they ended up shedding 1,000 megawatts of load. And I'm sitting here at my son's soccer game, and my phone just every other second, I'm getting notifications of energy emergency alerts. For those of you who don't know what those are, it's a tool that balancing authorities can use. So whenever they foresee that they might be in a situation where they have energy shortages, deficiencies, they can call on assistance. So they issue these energy emergency alerts. There's different levels, and I won't go into them, but a level 3 means that this balancing authority is either in the act of shedding load, or it's fairly imminent that they're going to shed load unless they can get immediate support. And so I'm sitting there watching my son play soccer, and my phone is just buzzing, and I keep seeing, so-and-so declared an energy emergency alert level 1. So-and-so, and I start getting calls from people. Okay, what, we have people that we coordinate with, what's going on? What have we heard from, the reliability coordinators? How does the situation in California look? So on and so forth. So that's why August 2020, one of the reasons it's kind of burned into my brain, is just the uniqueness of the events surrounding that. So ultimately that night of my son's soccer game, same thing happened. California ended up shedding another, let's see, I have it written down here, 692 megawatts of load because of energy deficiencies. And that heat wave continued to just pound the West for days following that, well into the next week. Luckily, those were the only 2 days that we had to shed load because we just didn't have enough energy to meet the demands at the time. So what did we learn from this August 2020 heat wave event? And I think that's really where, our conversations are going to be centering over the next couple of days, is when these types of events happen, what can we learn from them? What do we take from them? And industry learned a lot from the August 2020 heat wave event. The first thing was just how how real the duck curve is. Are you all familiar with the duck curve? It's a daily load curve, and really what it is it shows you the impacts of when the sun goes down and you start to lose solar generation, but yet load remains high. It shows you the steep ramp that we have to meet in the afternoon to maintain energy to the load. And so August 2020 was one of those real life events, and we had seen the duck curve with no real bad implications. But on August 2020, we saw an instance where we couldn't meet load after the sun went down, those evening hours when our solar generation dropped off, but load still remained high. And we actually saw load shedding because of that. We saw the effect on weather dependent resources, solar generation, wind generation, how they behave in extremely hot weather conditions. And, you know, we've learned this over the last several years that a lot of the times when these heat waves or these heat domes settle in, you don't have wind. And so you can't count on wind resources during those times. We learned about certain types of weather events and the impacts of long duration and widespread weather events. So let me give you a couple of examples here. So first and foremost, I guess it helps to kind of recognize that the Western interconnection was built to take advantage of regional diversity, to take advantage of resource diversity. And so Masood showed a map earlier that had the transmission network overlaid in the West. And you can kind of see there's a 500 kV transmission donut that goes around the system. It's more like a C. But that system was really designed to help us take advantage of things like geographic diversity, resource diversity. So, for example, historically in the middle of the summer when it was really hot in the Southwest, we could use that transmission system to access resources in the Pacific Northwest, hydro resources, when their loads were typically lower, and we could ship those down to the Southwest to help meet the needs of the people down there when it was really hot. These extreme weather events are kind of forcing us to rethink the concept of geographic and resource diversity. So when the entire Western interconnection is in the middle of a heat wave, a lot of the times you can't rely on imports from your neighbors to help you out because they're needing to serve their own demand. We saw the effects of widespread effects on, like I mentioned, different types of resources, on wind and solar. When you're expecting them to be there and they're not, we saw the impacts that can have throughout the interconnection. The other thing about some of these extreme weather events is they're typically not just coming at us unique and alone. So for example, when you're in the middle of a heat wave, you're probably also worrying about wildfires and how they're affecting transmission, your ability to import. You're probably also worrying about droughts in different parts of the system. There's a lot of compounding effects that come along with these different types of weather events. And then if you put on top of that, like the loss of a significant generator or the loss of a significant transmission path, it really just compounds the issues that you see. And we saw that in August 2020. There were some transmission lines out of service in the Pacific Northwest that really inhibited the ability of California to access more energy from the Northwest. One important thing, and I won't go into this too much, but we learned the importance of getting accurate day ahead forecasts. So you'll notice the first 2 days, well, one of the first 2 days of that heat wave was when we had resource deficiencies. We didn't have to shed load for the rest of the August 2020 heat wave event. However, the peak was set later that week. The peak demand record was set later that week. And that was because we started to get behind some of those day ahead forecasts and understood better that, hey, we need to procure and get resources ready because this heat wave isn't going away anytime soon. Following the heat wave event, we learned the importance of different types of technologies in helping us to overcome some of the effects. So after August 2020, California went out and they expedited the procurement of a lot of batteries. And that actually helped them through a couple of other heat spells in the future. And this might be a lesson that, we necessarily didn't pull from the August 2020 event, but looking at follow-on events, we also learned that maybe history isn't the best predictor of future weather conditions. And so I know at WECC, we use history to help inform us for our different types of load forecasts or load distribution curves for our probabilistic analysis. Maybe we need to rethink the types of future scenarios that we plan to, and they don't always need to be based on historic precedent. So I could go on and on and on about the other lessons we learned, but I think I'll cut it short right there. And as we talk about resilience over the next couple of days, I really just encourage you to ask the question as an industry, and I do consider academia part of the power industry. We're partners in ensuring resilience and reliability. As an industry, what do we need to consider as we encounter more and more frequent extreme weather or extreme natural events? And I made a list, and you can make your own list, but I thought of things like, are the tools that we use today sufficient? Is the data and information that we have available sufficient to meet the future needs of the grid? Do we need to rethink some of the expertise that we're bringing into the conversations to help us understand the risks? What is the impact of these extreme weather events on weather dependent resources? I think we've started to get kind of a snippet of starting to get a little bit of an understanding of how to account for availability of different types of weather dependent resources during these events. But I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. What types of planning assumptions and criteria do we use as we think about the future grid that we want to build? You're probably familiar, FERC came out with an order a few months ago, Order 1920, that really challenged the way that we do regional transmission planning. They encouraged us to look further out, longer duration, 20-year future. They encouraged us to look at different scenarios. And really that's to help understand the possibilities. The future is very uncertain. And so scenarios help us start to put balance on some of that uncertainty. Things like gas, electric, water interdependencies. You remember Winter Storm Uri in Texas. We saw firsthand what happens when you have the gas system go down and the electric system go down, and they're both dependent on each other. And it was just a big mess, and we won't go into that too much, but it really did illustrate the importance of understanding inter-industry dependencies. So I think I'm out of time, but I just want to leave you with a few more thoughts. I just want to emphasize the importance of data and information on the work that we do and on the work that we're going to be doing. And I know there's going to be a lot of conversation around information and data over the next couple of days, but it's key. It's key to helping us do exactly what you all mentioned when it comes to designing and developing a resilient grid. We need data, we need information, we need good data and good information. And I just want to leave you with one final thought, and that is grid reliability and resilience is really a team sport. There's no one company, there's no one individual that's going to solve all of these problems. They're very complicated. It's going to take the collective efforts of all of us working with other industry partners to really identify and solve some of these challenges that are ahead of us. And I'm excited for it. I mean, what a great time to be in the industry. I know it can be overwhelming, and sometimes I give presentations and I sit down and I think, wow, I feel like I just sucked all the air out of the room. I just painted this really bleak picture of the future of what's happening. But I am excited to be part of this effort. And once again, thank you to you students who are choosing this route in life. We need your help. But what an exciting time. And I leave that with you today.
Thank you, Branden. I know we are out of time, but any final questions, like, yes, let's take few minute question.
Thank you for your comments. One question, how do we do massive load shedding? Exactly what does that entail?
There's probably people in here that know that a lot better than I do, but typically it's not like massive load shedding. You've heard the term rotating blackouts, rotating brownouts. they're looking for different types of load pockets, and you typically don't shed the same amount of load for the entire duration. You're moving that around, you're restoring power at certain times to lessen the overall impact to any one community. And there's a lot of different factors too to consider. Things like hospitals on feeders or essential buildings or different types of services that are essential that need electricity. So it's complicated. Like I said, there's probably others in here that are a lot better suited to answer that particular question, but it's very strategic in how they do it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Related to your case studies and event analysis, those are kind of things that several of us in the WIRED research team really need that information. Is that something that WECC can share, at least at a high level, as far as what weather-related events that impacted the grid?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will say too, a lot of if you're looking at like extreme cold weather events, we've partnered with NERC and FERC over the last several years on some of these winter storms, Winter Storm Uri, Elliott. And so we could point you in the right direction to get a hold of some of those reports as well.
Yeah, so seems like he was going to ask you. So we are working on that. Some update is that we just met like a couple of weeks ago with Chris and others. So we are kind of like working to create a joint task force to continue working together more closely.
I wanted to ask, how do you think about the double squeeze that occurs during these extreme weather events where the load is at a peak and it's even at an extreme peak, not just because air conditioning may be peaking, but the efficiency of air conditioners, say, for example, goes down. The efficiency of EV chargers goes down during these high weather, high temperature events. At the same time that the carrying capacity of the electrical components has to be derated. And so there's a dynamic effect there, and even forecasting that into the future, ASHRAE has guidance for calculating cooling loads of buildings that are based on historical data of the last 50 to 100 years, and the load calculations of even recently built buildings may be off going forward. So how do you think about that kind of double squeeze of the loads peaking in diverse ways at the same exact time that the electrical components that support the grid are being derated?
No, I think you probably just identified one of the challenges I think that this industry is going to have to figure out going forward. And, historically, I was going to mention this, but a lot of the studies that we did, we looked at things like the peak load hour of the year, and we assumed that essentially all generation was available, transmission was available. And if our system study showed that we could be reliable for that 1 hour of the year, we just made this blanket assumption that, hey, the rest of the year should be fine because that is the most stressed time of the year. I think what we're seeing now is that's not the case. During some of these extreme weather events, and even, from what we've seen during shoulder season events, when there's not high temperatures, when there's high penetrations of renewables on the system, there are certain conditions that we need to be aware of, things like maintenance outages, because if you have an event and you all of a sudden lose a lot of wind, say in the northern part of the system, you need to make sure that you have enough backup generation that can get online and ramp up quickly to cover that deficiency. And same thing with, like you're talking about, like the D rates because of the extreme weather. We need to figure out how to incorporate that into our planning efforts, because unlike the past when that peak hour was really the hour we had to worry about, I think there are going to be several hours throughout the year under different scenarios, different conditions that we really need to be aware of as we think about building the future grid.
So it becomes more.
Yeah, that net peak was certainly a huge factor in August 2020 as well.
Well, great question.